All right, gang. I wanted to go on to the next chapter. I also want to talk about two-dimensional arrays just a little bit more. Specifically, like if we have a position in the array, like if we're at column, row 2, column 3, how do we get all the other values, right? The ones that are adjacent to us, the ones that are up, the ones that are below us, the ones that are to the left, and ones to the right. So, to enable that to happen, I'm just going to make an array, and I'm going to fill it full of, sequential data of some kind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stuff like that. So if you remember, the way you declare an array is like that, but it's going to be a 2D array, so we're going to put a comma in there. Then I have to give it a name. I'm going to call this one map, just for fun. And then equals new int, and this is going to be a 10 by 10 array. Now, let's use a loop. Actually, it's going to be a nested loop to put some data in there. Yeah, we could use random number generators and get fancy, but there's no real reason for that. So we need to use a nested loop. And the way that we do this is just slightly different than you have done it in Java, perhaps. For int row equals 0, row is less than map dot get length parentheses 0. What does that 0 mean? That means along the first axis, right? That 10. If this was 20, it's going to return 20. If it was, if that number was a 40, then get length would return a 40. If we do get length 1, it's going to return that number, right? So if we made a 40 by 5 array, get length 0 returns 40, get length 1 returns 5. All right, and then row plus plus. And why don't we just put in sequential numbers? So I'm going to declare a variable called count. Int count is equal to 0. And I'm going to assign a value. Whoops, I haven't done my inner loop yet. So we're going to do an inner loop for columns. For int call equals 0, call is less than map dot get length subscript 1, that's the number of columns in it, call plus plus, and then we can say that map at row comma call is equal to our count, and then we're going to add 1 to our count. And I've got this wrong. Call does not exist in this current context. I've got a syntax error in here somewhere. Oh, that needed to be a semicolon. All right. Now let's print our array out. And definitely have this memorized. You got to know how to print an array as a grid. It's going to be the same loop structure, though. I could just copy this stuff and paste it. That's faster. I'm going to copy that stuff, I'm going to paste it, and then the stuff inside the inner loop, I'm going to replace it with a print. While I'm here, I'm going to put an end for row there, just to mark where I am. And maybe I'll add some comments as to what I'm doing. Let's put some values into our array. And this comment's going to be print the array. So again, it's a nested loop. So what did I do? I just pasted it. But this is the stuff that's going to change. We're no longer assigning values. We're going to print. So console.write, not write line, because I don't want to go to the next line every time I print a number, right? If it was a 10 by 10 array, I don't want 100 prints all in a row going down the page. I want 10 numbers, and then I want to go to the next line, and 100, and then go to the next line. So I need to put my placeholder, so placeholder 0, but I want every number to maybe be 4 spaces wide or something like that. give us enough space so that everything lines up cleanly. And what am I going to print? I'm going to print our map at position row, comma, call. Now, after our inner loop, I'm going to write line, just so to go to the next line, because this prints out every column in that row. Then we're going to effectively hit the enter key to go to the next line. So console.writeLine, nothing, like that. So we have successfully printed the array, and we can find variations of this kind of code. And if you Google up printing 2D array with C#, you can find some that look, very strange or whatever. This is appropriate. And I need a read key at the bottom, don't I? I just noticed that if you create a new console app using Visual Studio 2017, it seems to add this to the bottom of your main already, which is nice. So there we are. There's our two-dimensional array, full of the numbers 0 through 99, because it's a 100-element array, an array of 10 by 10s. Now what I want to be able to do is ask for a row and a column, print that value, but then also print the values to the north, the south, and the east, and the west. So let's do that. Let's write a little loop. I'm just going to make it a while true loop. And we're going to have to do the whole rigmarole of try parse and stuff like that. But anyways, so int row, comma column, we're going to fill up those two values. Console, or I'm going to just type CW and hit tab tab. Inner row number, space end quote. And if I make that right rather than right line, then they will type on the same line. So string s is equal to console.read line. And you know what? I think I'm just going to skip doing try parse. I'm going to be a bad programmer, and so I'm going to do row is equal to right double dot parse parentheses s. And let me guess, I'm doing this wrong, and I should have just used a try parse. Oh, why am I using double? It's an integer. Okay. Integer.tryparse. And that's not working. Is it int 32? What is it? Come on.
It's just int.
Int dot? Is it int lowercase?
Yeah, it's all just.
Alrighty, there we go. There we go. That's pretty. Okay. Let's do enter a row number, comma, or -1 to quit. Right, that way we can bail. So if row equals -1, then break. Break out of our while loop. All right, let's ask them for the column number. Read that in and convert it. There's some things that I like about C++, and the ability to get your input on the input stream, although bizarre and not available in other languages. Also Java with their next int and next double and things like that. So anyways, console.write parentheses, enter a column number, or -1 to quit. Now we've already declared s. So s is equal to console.read. Whoopsie, that doesn't look right. Let me guess, if I type CR tab tab, nope, that didn't do it. I wonder what the shortcut for read line is. Console.read line. Now let's parse it. COL is equal to lowercase int dot parse. parentheses, end parentheses. Whoops, and I want to parse the string, so I need to put that between the parentheses. All right, let's print the value at that position. Console dot write line. The value at placeholder 0, comma, placeholder 1 is placeholder 2, end quote, comma, row, comma, call, comma, map, subscript, row, comma, call. All right, so due north, if we want to find the one to our north, what are we going to do? Are we going to subtract 1 from our column? We're going to add 1 to row? How do we peek north? Well, we already know what row we're on. We know what column we're on. But if you want to look at the element above you, right, if you have 5 rows and you're looking at row 4, you want to subtract 1 from row, right, so that you go and look up at row 3. I'm going to cheat and copy. So how about the value to the north is, that changes our placeholder. I'm going to delete all the parameters except I'm going to make it row minus 1. Then I'm going to do the value to the south, the value to the east, and the value to the west. So I'm going to wind up copying those lines. Now if you're going south, you're not going to subtract 1. You're going to add 1 to the row. You're going to go down the table. So the value to the south is placeholder 0, row plus 1. Now this logic has a problem, by the way, which is that if you're at the edge of the array, right, then we're going to be reading past the end of the array. So we're going to need some if statements to qualify this. We'll fix this in a minute. Now I'm going to do east and west. If you're doing east, you're not changing your row, right? You want to stay on the same row, but you want to go to, 1 more to the right, so you're going to add 1 to column. So the value to the east is row, comma, column plus 1. And now we're going to do the value to the west. Console.writeLine. But why am I doing that when I can just copy and paste it? Copy, paste, the value to the west. That's 1 to the left, right? So we need to remove 1 from our column. All right, I'm going to test it out. And what do you know? It didn't do anything. I probably have a read key above these questions. Yep, I did. So I'm going to cut my read key and I'm going to move it down to the bottom of my method. So that one's the end while. After my end while, I need a read key. And then this is the end of main. That's the end of class. End of namespace, whatever. All right, so there we go. Enter a row number. I want this position, right? I want 81 here. So that's row number 1, 2, 3. Well, we got to start counting at 0. Row 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's row 8, and it's column 1. So 0, 1. So going to my little output window. I want row 8, column 1. The value at 8, 1 is 81. The value to the north, we subtracted 1 from the row and we got 71. The value to the south is 91. The value to the east is 82. The value to the west is 80. Now the only problem is what if we're at an edge, right? Like what if I pick row 8 but column 0? It's going to blow up. Row 8, column 0, and kablooey, it blows up. That's to be expected. We read past the end of the array. Debug, stop debugging. All right, so we need some if statements, right? Here we're subtracting from row, but we want to make sure that we're not going to be looking at a negative number here. So we're just going to do this. If row is greater than 0, it's okay to do this. And I should put braces around it and stuff to make it look pretty, right? Here, I want to make sure that the row is not greater than the length of the array. This sure would be easier if I had stored a variable called rows and columns, right? Maybe I'll do that. I think I'm going to come up here at the very top, maybe even here, and I'm going to do int rows equals map dot get length subscript 0, and int columns equals map dot get length subscript 1, just so that I don't have to use that get length in my if statements, right? Wouldn't be any problem with that, but I think the code's going to be easier to read if we already know the number of rows and the number of columns. I could even make it int num underscore rows and int num underscore columns. Okay. So having that stuff, I'm going to scroll back down to my print statements. You know what? I ought to validate the data as well, right? If they choose a row that's less than 0 or greater than or equal to the number of rows, that's a problem. It would blow up here. So how about that? If, whoopsie, not I read-only connection. After we parse the column, oh, I didn't let them quit here, right? I did for row. But after we parse the column, I didn't let them quit. So if column equals -1, then break. Now let's do some error checking. If row is less than 0, or row is greater than or equal to num underscore rows, it's a problem. We might want to print an error message. CW tab invalid row number. And then continue to repeat our loop. Force our loop to reiterate. Now I'm going to do the same thing for columns, right? So if, ooh, neat, if I hit if tab, it fills in a lot of stuff, but I'm not going to do that. All right. So if column is less than 0, or column is greater than or equal to the number of rows, then we're going to write an error message, CW tab invalid column number, end quote, parentheses, semicolon, and then we're going to continue. We're going to reiterate the loop. We're not doing a break. We're not going to kill, the program just because they typed in invalid row number. We're going to give them a second shot at it. I think I'll try that out just to make sure that that part of the code is working before we get fancy with anything else. All right, enter row number 20, enter column number 30. Invalid row number. It sure is. It's also an invalid column number, right? We could move these checks to the right place so that it does the check immediately after we read the row. That would be appropriate. If we took this code, cut, and pasted it right there after that first break statement, that would be better. I'm not going to do that because when I start cutting and pasting the stuff on screen, it gets too confusing for people following. But if you wanted to, you could copy that stuff about row less than 0, cut it, and come here and paste it before the console.write, enter a column number. Okay, now that we have the num rows and the num columns, so if the row is greater than or 0, it's safe to peek to the north. How about to the south? What is our boundary going to be? If we're sitting right at the number of columns, the number of rows, -1 though, right? Because if it's 10 rows, and we're sitting on row 9, that's actually the last row, right? Because we count from 0 to 9. So if row -1 is less than num underscore rows, like that. You know what, I like the way that looks. I'm going to change this one to kind of match. If row, I've goofed by the way, that should be row +1. If row +1, no, if row -1 is greater than or equal to 0, then it's a valid value, right? Why am I doing it like that? So that that expression matches that one. And so in that case, this needs to be if, the second one needs to be if row +1 is less than num rows, then go ahead and do that, because that's a valid row if the element that we're looking at, the subscript that we're looking at, is less than the length of it, because it goes from 0 to length. All right, now we can do the east and the west. Same idea, column +1. So if parentheses col +1 is less than the number of columns, in parentheses, tab the stuff over underneath it. All right. And the last one. We're going to subtract 1 from column, so we need to make sure that the result of subtracting 1 from the column is greater than or equal to 0. So if col -1 is greater than or equal to 0, it's a valid value. So if col -1 greater than or equal to 0, in parentheses, console.write line, there. So if I pick 0, 0, there is no up value, and there is no west value. So 0, 0. The value to the south is 10, that's correct, it went down. The value to the east is 1, that's correct, and the other two were skipped because we were at the edge. What if we wanted to figure out the sum of all those values, right? Or the sum of all of them around there. Maybe you've played the game Minesweeper, right? And if you pick a place and then it shows you the number of mines that are nearby, stuff like that. Well, you would just have to check, row -1, column -1, row -1, column 0, row +(-1), column +1. I think I'd kind of like to put that in a function myself. So let's write something called sum neighbors. But anyways, int sum equals sum underscore neighbors. That's too long of a word. Sum nearby. And what are we going to have to pass? We're going to have to pass the map to it, and the row, and the column. Now there is no sum nearby function, right? And I certainly didn't need braces there, so I don't know what I'm doing, semicolon. But I'm going to add a sum nearby method. In preparation for that, console.write right line. The sum of the nearby elements is placeholder 0, curly brace 0, comma, sum in parentheses and semicolon. All right, and of course it's still complaining that we don't have a sum nearby method. I'm going to copy that just to keep it in my head to see if I need to remember the order of the parameters. So I'm going to go up above main, inside class, above main, int sum nearby. It needs to be static though because we're calling it from a static method. So excuse me, static int sum underscore nearby. And now the type of the map is a two-dimensional array, so int subscript, comma, close subscript, map, comma, int row, comma, int call. It's probably complaining because we're not returning a value yet. So let's just declare a variable called sum, set it equal to 0, and then on the next line we're going to return sum. Now obviously we have to fill in the rest. And again, we're going to need to know the number of rows and the number of columns. So let's do that. Int num underscore rows equals map dot get length parentheses 0. Int num calls equals map dot get length subscript 1. Let's just make things easier. And you know what? What we're doing here would be so much easier if we were using exception handling. So we're going to write another function called getValue. And it just returns 0 if that element is off the map, right? If they give us an invalid row or an invalid column, we're going to return 0. It's going to be off the map. I'm going to take that stuff, these two lines here, cut them, and put them into something static int get map underscore value. And we're going to have to pass the map in. So int subscript, comma, subscript, map, comma, int row, comma, int call. We need to know the number of rows and the number of columns. And so, if row is less than 0, or, no wait, or row, oh come on, row is greater than or equal to num underscore rows, it's invalid. So just return a 0. And I seem to have a syntax error there. Nope, it went away. And the same for columns. If column is less than 0 or column is greater than or equal to the number of columns. If column is less than 0 or column is greater than or equal to num underscore columns, return 0. Right. We're just ruling out the bad values. If we're at the edge of our map, we're just going to return 0. Oh, this was supposed to be num calls. I called it calls here, so whatever. Alright. But, assuming that we get here, then we know that we have a good value. Return the map at row, comma, call. Right, that makes sense. If we pass in invalid values, we're going to get a 0 out of it because we're trying to read past the end of the map. All that we're trying to do is sum up all of our neighbors. And if we're trying to pull a position that's outside of the map, then that value doesn't count. So it's going to return a 0. All right. So I'll leave that on screen. You're going to need to get that in. So sum plus equals, and I'm going to wind up copying and pasting this next statement a lot. Get map underscore value, the map, comma, the row, comma, the call, but I'm going to make some changes to it. I typed it all in. I'm going to need 9 copies of that, right? Because we have 9 neighbors. But firstly, I'm going to do at row -1. And then paste and make it at row. Not just at row column, but let's do row +1. Nope, nope, nope. I'm kind of going off the rails here. I'm going to copy that statement, make it row -1, column -1. Row -1, column, just 0, right? Not modified. And row -1, column +1. See what I'm doing? I went one up. I went up a row, but then I checked the elements, you know, to the left, where we are, and to the right. Now how's about I just copy and paste that and do row +1 to do the same things for the row underneath us. So I'm going to copy those 3, paste them, and make that row +1, row +1, row +1. And then lastly, for our current row, we're only going to need 2, right? Because we need to check to the left and to the right of ourselves. Like that. Whoops, I can delete that one entirely. We don't want the element at row, comma, column, because we only want the nearby ones. If we wanted to sum that one too, sure, I don't care. Anyways, okay. So there we go. That ought to work unless I've done my check wrong. So map get value returns 0 if this is an invalid coordinate. If it's a valid coordinate, it returns that value. And so this is a perfectly good way to do it. Now, could we iterate through this with a loop? Sure, we could. But I'm going to leave that alone. All right, so eyeball that, type it in, make sure you got it, pause if need be. Same for this one. Eyeball that, pause, type it in, make sure you got it right. No syntax errors. Now I'm going to scroll way back down here to the bottom where the sum of the nearby elements. I think I'm going to change that to neighbors. The sum of the neighbors is that. So this is the stuff that calls the functions that we just wrote. We're calling sum nearby, and sum nearby is going to call, you know, the get functions that we wrote. All right, so at row 0, column 0, our value is 0. Our value to the south is 10. The value to the east is 1. And the sum of the neighbors is 21. Is that true? 1 plus 11 is 12. Plus another 10. I'm not sure why it's not 22. Something wrong. I'm going to pick another one down here in the middle. Well, they get too hard to figure out here. How about that one? Row 0, column 1. The value to the south is 11. That's true. The value to the west is 0. That's true. The value to the east is 2. And the sum of our neighbors, okay. 10 plus 20 is 30. It's obviously not working. I don't think it's getting row plus 1. I don't think it's getting the values of row plus 1. So I'm going to scroll back up, all the way back up. All right, looks like it's supposed to be getting them. That must mean that our get function is not working correctly. I need to go and check the if statement about the rows up here. I guess to try to debug it, I'm just going to console.writeLine the value that we're returning. Returning subscript 0, and then I ought to pause the recording and debug it so I'm not wasting your time trying to figure out what's wrong here. But anyways, we're returning that at map 0 row, comma, call. Let's run it. I'm going to pick this position, which is row 0, column 1. And so when it started adding things up, it got a 10, an 11, and a 12. It didn't check that one. It didn't check that one. That's kind of weird. Alright, I'm going to pause it, guys. Alright, spotted the problem. The problem is not in get map value. I'm going to delete all of my debug write lines that I had in there. If you added any debug write lines to map get value, remove them now. The problem is here. I check the row above us, I check the row below us, and then this last set is supposed to be our current row. Well, if it's our current row, we shouldn't be subtracting 1 from it. Right? Row above us is all -1s. Row below us is all +1s. Our current row is that. We could even make some comments. Get the row above us. Get the row below us. Get our row. All right, so that one, 0, 1, and the sum of them is 0 plus 2, that's 2, plus 10, 12, 30, 23, 35. Yeah, that's correct. And if we wanted it to include that spot as well, it'd be real easy to fix that. All we would have to do is add one more get here that actually did get map row, comma, column, right? I'm trying to get you used to the idea of inspecting your neighbor elements, though. That's what the whole point of this is. Now, if we wanted to, rather than return a 0, we could return a true or false, indicating whether there was a valid value or not. And we could use a reference parameter in order to get that value out, just like we use try parse, right? That way we would know whether there was a successful value there or not. But in this particular case, I didn't mind just returning 0. Alrighty, I think we've mostly done enough, but how about if we want to sum up that entire row that we're on? We have a row specified, right? We asked them for a row. You know, somewhere here we asked them for the row. Let's get the sum of that row. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to write a loop where row is hardwired to the value that they typed in, but column is iterated with a for loop. So way down here, after we calculate and print the sum of our neighbors, let's calculate and print the sum of that entire row. So I'm going to reset sum equal to 0. And this is not going to be a nested loop because we're not going to change the value of row, right? We're just going to change the value of column. So, for int, what's a good variable name of this? TC for temp column equals 0. TC is less than num underscore columns. TC plus plus. And then sum plus equals map at our current row, and then our iterated variable TC. So subscript row comma TC. And let's print out the sum of that row. For int, no wait, I don't need a for loop, I've already calculated it. So console, right line, CW, tab, tab. The sum of row placeholder 0, end placeholder is placeholder 1, end placeholder, end quote, comma, row, comma, sum, end parentheses, end semicolon. Now what if we wanted to get the sum of the columns? Same idea, except we would iterate through a variable for the first subscript while keeping that one equal to the column that they specified. We can do that as well. 4. Hey, if I type 4 and hit tab tab, does it fill out all that good stuff? Yeah, it sure does, but it replaces it with stuff. It's almost easy just to type it. 4 int tr for temporary row is equal to 0, because we need to, once we're looking at a specific column, we want to go through all the rows. Tr is equal to 0, tr is less than num underscore rows, tr plus plus. Oh, I forgot to reset sum equal to 0, so while I'm remembering it, above this for loop, sum is equal to 0. And then sum plus equals our map at temporary row counter, comma, specified column, right? Get every value in that particular column, iterating the row from 0 up to, but not including the length. And one more console right line. I probably could just copy and paste this one just as fast as typing it. But change row to column, right? I'm going to highlight those two lines. Come down here. And the sum of column. And then I'm going to put COL here. So this is my new stuff. This is the stuff that I added. You need to pause it, whatever. That's where we are. Take a look. All right, I'm going to look at this element, right, just because it's easy to calculate, the sum of that row and that sum of that column. So 0 is my row, 0 is my column. The sum of row 0 is 45, and that is correct. If you add up the numbers 1 to 9, you do get 45. So if you add up the numbers between 10 and 90, you get 450. I am sure that that's correct, right? Because 9 and 1 is 10, 8 and 2 makes 20, 7 and 3 makes 30, 6 and 4 makes 40, and then you have a 5 left in the middle. So that's correct. All right. I hope that was interesting, especially since one of the project ideas involves an array, right? Finding a position in an array and then deciding where you're going to go, in order to find the largest value. I think that's enough. And I think that we have lectured on two-dimensional arrays quite enough at this point. So let's go ahead and stop.